The first time Alara realized her marriage was a lie. She was standing in the middle of a glittering ballroom, and her husband was dancing with another woman. Not just any woman, Lady Seraphina Montclair, the woman whose portrait still hung in the west wing of Thornwood Hall, gazing down with soft, knowing eyes every time Alara walked past. The woman Cassian Ashworth, Duke of Thornwood, had loved long before duty forced him to choose a bride he never wanted. Alara stood near the marble pillars, her hands clasped in front of her, her heart beating so loudly she was sure the entire room could hear it. She wore pale blue silk, chosen because someone once told her it made her look serene. Serene. That was what everyone called her. The quiet Duchess, the graceful Duchess, the Duchess who never complained. She felt anything but serene now. She watched Cassian's hand settle lightly on Seraphina's waist as they moved through the waltz, his dark head bent toward hers. His lips formed words Alara could not hear, but Seraphina laughed, tilting her golden curls back. They looked like a painting come to life. The perfect couple. Everyone else seemed to think so too. Whispers skittered through the crowd like dry leaves. He never stopped loving her, you know. She's a widow now, poor thing, returned from the continent. She needs comfort. The Duchess is gracious enough to stand aside. What else can she do? Alara felt the sting behind each word, but her expression did not falter. She had been taught since childhood that a lady never shows her pain in public. So she simply stood there, a ghost in satin slippers, and waited for the music to end. When the waltz finished and Cassian finally escorted Seraphina back to her circle of admirers, he did not even glance at his wife. He did not seek her out. He did not return to her side. He simply strolled toward the card room, a glass of brandy in his hand, as though she did not exist. That was the moment Alara's hope began to wither. She had married Cassian 3 years earlier, not for love but for alliance. Her family's dwindling fortune had been shored up by his name. His vast estate had been stabilized by her generous dowry. It was meant to be a sensible arrangement. And on the morning of their wedding, when she had walked down the aisle, her hand trembling in his, she had foolishly believed that respect would eventually blossom into something warmer. He had been kind in those first weeks. Distant, yes, preoccupied, but kind. He would inquire about her comfort. He would thank her for overseeing the household. Once, standing in the garden as she clipped roses, he had paused and said, "You have a gift for making things beautiful, Alara." That single sentence had fed her hope for an entire year. She clung to it during the long, silent dinners where he read newspapers instead of meeting her eyes. She replayed it in her mind during the nights she lay alone in her vast bedchamber, listening to the wind moan through Thornwood's ancient eaves. She nurtured it like a fragile flame, believing that if she was patient enough, gracious enough, good enough, he would eventually see her. But Seraphina's return had extinguished that flame completely. The ballroom began to empty. Guests drifted toward the supper room. Alara remained by the pillar, her legs unwilling to move. A footman passed with a tray of champagne, but she shook her head. She could not stomach anything. She was still standing there when Lady Beatrice, Cassian's younger sister, appeared at her elbow. Beatrice was sharp-eyed and blunt-tongued, the only person in Thornwood who ever spoke to Alara as if she were a real person and not a porcelain ornament. "You should have left the room the moment he asked her to dance," Beatrice said quietly, her voice tight with irritation. "Now they're all saying you have no pride." Alara swallowed. Perhaps they're right. Beatrice took her arm firmly. "Come, I'll walk you to the carriage. Let my brother find his own way home." But Alara did not move. She looked across the ballroom toward the card room door. Half-hopping Cassian would emerge and see her, half dreading it. He did not appear. The hope and dread tangled inside her chest until she felt sick. Finally, she allowed Beatrice to guide her out of the house and into the cold night air. The carriage ride back to Thornwood was silent. Beatrice held her hand but said nothing, because there was nothing to say. When they arrived at the great iron gates of the estate, Alara climbed the stone steps alone. The vast entrance hall echoed with her footsteps. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows. She paused at the foot of the grand staircase and looked up. At the top of the stairs, just visible in the dim light, hung the portrait of Serafina Montclair. It had been there since before Alara's arrival, a full-length oil painting, Serafina at 18, wearing rose silk and an enigmatic smile. Cassian had commissioned it during their courtship. When Alara first moved into Thornwood, she had requested it be moved to a less prominent location. Cassian had refused. He said it was a fine work of art and belonged where it was. She had never asked again. Now she stared at it, and something inside her broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, internal snap, like a thread pulled too tight finally giving way. She realized she had been holding her breath for 3 years. She had been waiting for a love that was never going to come. The next morning, she did not go down to breakfast. Cassian noticed, or rather, he noticed her absence after finishing his coffee and scanning the room. He assumed she was unwell, but he did not inquire. He had estate matters to attend to. Serafina had mentioned wanting to visit Thornwood's famous rose gardens later that week, and he needed to instruct the groundskeeper to have them in perfect order. His mind was full of Serafina. It had been full of her since the letter arrived announcing her return to England. A widow now, free of the aged earl she had chosen over him 6 years ago. She had made a mistake, she wrote. She had never forgotten him. He had read that letter 3 times. Alara in her room was not unwell. She was packing, not to leave permanently, not yet, but she had decided to travel to the little village of Milford, half a day's ride away, to visit a foundling home she had secretly funded for the past year. She needed purpose. She needed to be somewhere her presence mattered. She left a brief, polite note for Cassian, saying she would be away for a few days to attend to charitable obligations. When he found it on his desk that afternoon, he read it once and set it aside without much thought. It was typical of her to be dutiful. He assumed she would be back quickly. She was gone for 10 days. In Milford, Alara discovered a version of herself she had almost forgotten existed. The foundling home was a modest brick building run by a weary but kind matron named Mrs. Henshaw. The children were thin and ragged but full of life. Alara spent her mornings helping with lessons, her afternoons mending clothes, her evenings reading stories by candlelight. The work made her hands rough and her heart lighter. It was there she met Nathaniel Greer. He was a physician, young and earnest, with gentle brown eyes and a quiet sense of humor. He visited the foundling home twice a week to tend the children's ailments, never accepting a coin for his services. He and Alara fell into easy conversation almost at once. He did not treat her as a duchess, but simply as a woman with a kind heart and a sharp mind. He asked her opinions on books. He laughed at her observations. He saw her. On the 7th day, they sat together on a bench in the small garden behind the home while the children played. The afternoon sun was warm. Nathaniel turned to her and said, "You look different today, Your Grace, less shadowed." Alara smiled faintly. "I feel different. Here, I am not an ornament." Nathaniel's expression softened. "You were never an ornament. Someone just forgot to see you properly." She looked away, her throat tight. Those words settled deep inside her, planting a seed she had not expected. When she returned to Thornwood Hall, she brought some of that light back with her, but the hall seemed darker than ever. The moment she stepped into the entrance, she saw that the portrait of Serafina had been polished, its frame gleaming. Fresh flowers sat on the console table beneath it. Beatrice met her in the corridor, her face pinched. "She's been here twice while you were gone, tea in the blue drawing room, walks in the garden. It's insufferable." Alara said nothing. She simply nodded and went upstairs to change. She no longer expected Cassian to greet her upon return, and he did not. Over the following weeks, the household settled into a strange new rhythm. Cassian continued to see Serafina regularly. They rode together, dined together at neighboring estates, appeared together at social functions. Alara was often invited, sometimes she attended, but she no longer hovered at her husband's side. She did not wait for him to offer his arm. She did not glance toward him, hopping for a shared look. She moved through gatherings with a quiet, independent grace that left many guests puzzled. The Duchess was no longer watching her husband. She seemed perfectly content on her own. This unnerved Cassian more than he could understand. He first noticed it at a garden party hosted by Lord and Lady Ashby. He had arrived with Serafina on his arm, as had become his habit. Alara arrived separately, having come from the foundling home, her gown a bit dusty at the hem but her expression serene. She did not seek him out. She did not look for him at all. Instead, she was immediately surrounded by a small group of guests who had grown fond of her gentle wit and genuine warmth. She laughed at something an elderly baron said. She placed a comforting hand on a shy young woman's shoulder. She moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence that drew eyes, including Cassian's. He found himself watching her, irritated at first because she was ignoring him completely. But then the irritation shifted into something sharper, something he did not want to name. She looked different, brighter, more at ease. When had she started smiling like that, and why did it not seem to include him? His irritation deepened when a young man approached her. The man was tall, brown-haired, with a kind face and a physician's modest coat. Nathaniel Greer. Cassian did not know him, but he saw the way Alara's entire expression softened when she turned toward him. She smiled, a real smile, the kind that touched her eyes. She laughed at something he said. They walked together toward a blooming hedge, heads bent in easy conversation. Cassian's hand tightened around his glass. "Who is that?" he asked Serafina, his voice low. Serafina glanced over, her lips pursing. "Oh, some village doctor, I believe. She met him while you were busy. How peculiar that a duchess would keep such low company." Cassian said nothing, but something hot and uncomfortable coiled in his chest. He did not like the way the man looked at his wife. He did not like the way his wife looked back. He did not approach her at the garden party. He did not speak to her about the physician. He brooded in silence, telling himself it was merely possessiveness, a natural reaction to seeing one's wife appear too familiar with another man. It meant nothing. It could not mean anything. But that night, alone in his study, he could not stop picturing Alara's smile. He could not remember the last time she had smiled at him that way. He could not remember the last time he had given her reason to. The next morning he found himself lingering near the breakfast room, hopping to catch her. When she entered, she looked surprised to see him still there. She greeted him politely, served herself tea, and sat down across from him. "I trust the garden party was enjoyable," he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "It was," she said. "Lady Ashby's roses are lovely." "You spent much time with that physician." Alara's teacup paused halfway to her lips. She met his gaze calmly. "Mr. Greer is a friend. He assists at the foundling home. A duchess should be mindful of appearances." Something flickered in her eyes, but it wasn't hurt. It was disappointment. She set her cup down. "I have been mindful of appearances for 3 years, Cassian. I have smiled when I wanted to weep. I have stood by while you danced with another woman in front of all society. I have been a perfect ornament. Do not lecture me now about appearances." The words hung in the air between them, quiet and devastating. Cassian opened his mouth, but no sound came. He had never heard her speak this way. There was no bitterness in her tone, only a calm, exhausted honesty. She rose from her chair. "I am going to the foundling home today. I will return by evening." She left him sitting there, his breakfast untouched, his mind reeling. Over the next fortnight, the distance between them grew into a chasm. Alara stopped attending social events where Serafina would be present. She stopped arranging elaborate dinners for Cassian's guests. She stopped waiting up for him in the evenings. She filled her days with charitable work, with books, with long walks alone. She was still kind, still polite, but she had withdrawn something essential: her hope, her longing, her quiet, desperate need for his affection. And Cashin felt its absence like a missing limb. He began to notice things he had never noticed before. The way she hummed softly when she arranged flowers. The way the servants brightened when she entered a room. The way her laughter, when it came naturally, sounded like music. He began to miss her. The ache was subtle at first, then increasingly sharp. One afternoon, he returned early from a ride and heard piano music drifting from the music room. He followed it, expecting to find Beatrice at the keys. Instead, he saw Ilara. She was playing something soft and melancholy, her fingers moving gently over the ivory. The late sunlight caught the copper threads in her hair. Her expression was far away, a little sad. She did not see him standing in the doorway. He watched her for a long moment and his chest tightened painfully. She was so beautiful. She had always been beautiful. Why had he not let himself see it? Why had he kept his heart locked away, guarding it for a memory that had never been worthy of it? The music stopped. Ilara sensed his presence and looked up, her hands stilled on the keys. "Forgive me," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I did not mean to intrude." "You are not intruding," she said, though her voice was distant. "It is your home." He stepped into the room, feeling suddenly awkward. "I have not heard you play in a long time." "You were rarely here to hear it." The simple truth cut him. He moved closer. "Ilara." She stood, closing the piano lid. "I should dress for dinner." "Wait." The word came out before he could stop it. She paused, looking at him expectantly. He searched for words, for anything to bridge the gap. "Serafina is leaving for London next week. She has asked me to go with her." He did not know why he said it. Perhaps to see her reaction. Perhaps to provoke something, anything, that showed she still cared. But Ilara's expression did not change. "I see," she said quietly. "And will you go?" "I have not decided." She nodded slowly. "You should do whatever brings you happiness, Cashin. You deserve that." She said it gently, with no trace of sarcasm. And that gentleness was worse than any accusation. She truly meant it. She wanted him to be happy, even if that happiness did not include her. She had stopped fighting for him entirely. He stood frozen as she walked past him and out of the room. The scent of lavender lingered in her wake. He had never felt so alone. That night he could not sleep. He paced his study, his mind a storm of confusion. Serafina wanted him. She had made it clear during their last walk. She spoke of the life they could have had if she had not been forced into that first marriage. She spoke of second chances. For years he would have given anything to hear those words. But now, when they finally came, they felt hollow. They felt wrong. He thought of Ilara's calm, selfless words. "You should do whatever brings you happiness." She had not shed a tear. She had not pleaded. She had simply released him. And that terrified him. The next day, Serafina arrived unannounced at Thornwood Hall. She found Cashin in the library, staring at a book he was not reading. She swept in, radiant in emerald silk, and closed the door behind her. "Cashin," she said, her voice honeyed, "I cannot wait any longer. I need an answer. Will you come to London with me? Will you finally choose us?" He looked at her, at the woman he had once believed he loved, and felt nothing but exhaustion. Serafina. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. "I know you still care for me. You have shown it all these weeks. Your wife is cold, distant. She has no interest in you anymore. But I do. Let me make you happy. You and I were meant to be." He caught her wrist, gently moving her hand away. "No." The word startled them both. Serafina's smile faltered. "No." "No," he repeated louder now. "I will not go with you. I will not pursue this any further. I am married." "A marriage of convenience," she protested. "Everyone knows it. She is a shadow in this house. You owe her nothing." Cashin's jaw tightened. "I owe her everything. She has been loyal, graceful, patient. She has managed my household, supported my tenants, suffered my neglect without complaint. And you dare call her a shadow?" His voice rose, laced with a fury he had not known he possessed. The only shadow here is the one I cast by clinging to a past that was never real. I have been blind. I have been a fool, but no longer. Seraphina's face paled. You don't mean this. I do. I want you to leave Thornwood today. She stared at him, shock and humiliation warring in her eyes. Then she drew herself up, cold and proud. You will regret this. You will realize what you've thrown away. I already know what I nearly lost, he said quietly. That is regret enough. She left in a whirl of silk and indignation. Cashin sank into a chair, his heart pounding. He had done it. He had finally severed the tether that had held him captive for so long, but the relief he expected did not come. Instead, a new fear gripped him. What if it was too late? What if Alara had already let him go completely? He needed to find her. He searched the house, the gardens, the stables. She was nowhere. Finally, a servant told him the Duchess had gone to the village to the foundling home. Of course. She always went there now. It was her refuge, her place away from him. He rode hard to Milford, arriving dusty and breathless. The foundling home was quiet in the late afternoon. He found Alara in the small garden, alone, sitting on a bench with a book open in her lap. She looked up in surprise as he approached, his boots crunching on the gravel. Cashin, what's wrong? Has something happened? He stopped a few paces from her, struggling to steady his breath. I told Seraphina to leave. I ended it for good. Alara set her book aside slowly. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know, I need you to understand. He took a step closer. I have been a blind, stubborn fool. I thought my heart was still bound to a memory. I thought I could not love again. But all this time you were here. You were patient. You were strong, and I ignored it. I ignored you. Her expression remained guarded, but something flickered in her eyes. Cashin. I'm not done, he said, his voice cracking. I watched you pull away. I watched you stop hopping. I felt you leave me long before you ever walked out the door. And it broke me. It broke me because I finally realized what I was losing. He dropped to one knee before her, right there on the garden path, his pride abandoned. Alara's eyes widened. What are you doing? Begging, he said hoarsely. Begging you to give me a chance I do not deserve. I love you, Alara. Not out of duty, not out of convenience. I love the way you hum when you think no one is listening. I love the way you care for these children as if they were your own. I love your quiet strength, your grace, your heart. I love you. And I am so terribly sorry it took me this long to say it. Tears slipped down Alara's cheeks. She pressed a hand to her mouth. For a long moment she could not speak. Then she whispered, I waited for so long. I thought I would wait forever. I know, he said, his own eyes burning. I know, and I cannot undo that time. But I swear to you, from this day forward, I will spend every moment proving that you are the most precious thing in my life. No more portraits, no more ghosts, only you, if you can still find it in your heart to forgive me. She looked at him, at the man who had once been so cold and distant, now kneeling before her with tears on his face. She thought of the years of loneliness, the nights of quiet weeping, the slow death of her hope. But she also thought of the love she had carried buried deep that had never truly died. It had only been waiting, waiting for him to finally see her. She reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers trembling. I never stopped loving you, she said softly. I only stopped believing you could love me back. He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips, his shoulders shaking with relief. Then let me prove you wrong, every day, for the rest of our lives. She nodded, a sob escaping her. He rose and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might vanish. She clung to him, burying her face against his chest, letting the years of pain wash away in that single embrace. They stood that way for a long time in the quiet garden as the golden afternoon light fell around them. The children's laughter drifted from inside the foundling home. The world went on, unchanged, but for them, everything had shifted. In the weeks that followed, Cashin became a different man. The portrait of Seraphina was taken down and burned in the courtyard, the frame chopped for firewood. The West Wing was repurposed into a music room for Alara. He accompanied her to the foundling home, meeting Nathaniel Greer with a stiff but genuine apology for his earlier rudeness. Nathaniel, ever gracious, shook his hand and said, "Take care of her. She deserves all the light in the world." Cashin replied, "I intend to give it." He courted his wife as if they were newly engaged. He brought her books he thought she might enjoy. He sat through her piano practices, listening with rapt attention. He learned the names of the foundling children and helped teach the older boys to ride. He held her hand in public, his gaze never straying. Society whispered at the transformation, but Cashin no longer cared about whispers. Alara blossomed. The guarded distance in her eyes melted away, replaced by a warmth that had always been there but had never been allowed to surface. She laughed more. She teased him gently. She challenged him during dinner discussions. She became his partner in every sense. One evening, as they walked through Thornwood's rose garden, she paused beside a bush heavy with pale pink blooms. The same roses she had been clipping when he gave her that first, faint compliment 3 years before. She touched a petal and smiled. "Do you remember the first kind thing you ever said to me?" she asked. Cashin stopped beside her, a little ashamed. "I said you had a gift for making things beautiful." "Yes, I held on to that. It was such a small thing, but it meant everything." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I should have said more. I should have said you were beautiful from the moment I saw you. I should have said I was terrified of loving you because I thought love only brought pain. I was wrong." She placed her hand over his heart. "We cannot change the past, but the future is ours." He drew her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I will fill that future with so much love, you will forget the years I made you wait. I swear it." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and he responded with a tenderness that held the weight of every unspoken word, every lost moment, every promise now reclaimed. That winter, Thornwood Hall was filled with light and warmth for the first time in memory. A Christmas ball was held, not out of obligation but out of joy. Alara stood beside her husband in the great hall, her hand resting securely in the crook of his arm. Her gown was deep crimson, and her smile was radiant. She danced the first waltz with Cashin, and he never once looked toward any other woman. The following spring, the Duchess was confirmed to be with child. The news brought a new kind of joy, a deeper bond. Cashin became fiercely protective, insistent on her rest, doting in ways that made Beatrice roll her eyes but smile. The foundling home received an anonymous donation large enough to build a new wing, but everyone knew who the donor was. Nathaniel Greer attended the dedication, and he and Alara remained dear friends, a friendship Cashin came to respect without jealousy. One warm summer afternoon, Alara sat in the garden with her infant daughter sleeping in a bassinet beside her. Cashin joined her, lifting the tiny girl with reverent hands. He looked from the child to his wife, his eyes bright. "I never knew I could feel this much," he said quietly. "You gave me a world I did not deserve." Alara reached up and touched his face, her heart full. "You gave me yourself. That is all I ever wanted." He sat beside her, the baby cradled in his arms, and they watched the sun sink low behind the ancient oaks of Thornwood. The air was sweet with roses. The silence between them was no longer empty, but full of a love that had been tested, broken, and rebuilt stronger than before. And in the quiet of Thornwood Hall, where portraits of old pain had once hung, new memories now lived. Laughter echoed in the corridors. Hope lingered in every sunlit room. Love, once lost to silence and shadow, had finally found its voice. And it sang,